Good morning. My name is Lauren Lele, and I am the Senior Director for Community Health at Newton-Wellesley Hospital. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our program titled Hypertension and Stroke, Practical Tips to Reduce Your Risk. Today's program is being hosted by the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Cardiovascular Council, the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Stroke Service, and the Weston Council on Aging. All the educational sessions are conducted by the Newton-Wellesley Hospital's Community Collaborative and are open to the whole community. Before the program officially starts, I would like to mention a few logistics for the next hour that we'll spend together. We will be leaving plenty of time for questions and answers and would ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type your questions in. I will be monitoring these questions and be asking them of our panelists at the end of the speaking portion of the program. We will not be using the chat feature in today's program. And now let me tell you a little bit about our presenters and panelists. Dr. Guy Rohrdorf is a board certified in neurology, vascular neurology, and critical care neurology, and the head for the stroke service at Newton-Wellesley Hospital. He is also an associate professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. Jane Barr is the community wellness coordinator for the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Cardiovascular Health Center. She is a licensed dietitian with a Master of Public Health. Her background includes program development, implementation, and evaluation in primary and secondary disease prevention. Ann Noki is a cardiopulmonary physical therapy specialist and the clinical manager of cardiac rehab at Newton-Wellesley Hospital. Ann has over 30 years of experience in cardiac care from the ICU to outpatient and is a certified yoga instructor. Ann will be joining as a panelist after the first part of the program. And now to begin, I will turn the program over to Jane.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. I hope you're having a great morning. It's nice and crisp out there. I'm going to go ahead and start to share my screen. Okay, one more second, and I will get into, all right. So thank you again for joining us. My name is Jane Barr. As Lauren mentioned, I am a registered dietitian, licensed dietitian in Massachusetts, and I have a master's in public health, and I'm happy to bring you this program, part of this program today. So our agenda today is going to cover hypertension guidelines. We are also going to talk about stroke, and then we're going to wrap up with some healthy lifestyle modifications. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started and talk about some of the signs and symptoms of high blood pressure. Just a few facts to be aware of. Nearly half of Americans have high blood pressure, and many people have high blood pressure and don't realize it. Many people with high blood pressure have no symptoms, so it's very hard to realize that you have it unless you're monitoring it. Because high blood pressure can develop slowly over time, and it can be related to many causes. Prescription drugs actually can have a good amount of sodium in them, and that can be one of the causing factors for high blood pressure. But there are a number of others, including kidney disease, family history, and some of the modifiable risk factors, such as tobacco use, stress, exercise, and diet. And we're going to talk more in depth about those in a little bit. But the good news is it can be effectively managed through lifestyle changes and medication when needed. But again, it's important to check your blood pressure regularly and to track it. This way you can see any changes that are coming and it won't sneak up on you. If you check it at different times during the day, that's probably optimal. And the reason for that is that blood pressure actually starts to rise before we get up in the morning. And then it continues to rise through midday, and it typically starts to drop in the afternoon. So if you're going to take it first thing in the morning before your medication, and then again in the evening, that would be a good regimen. And it's recommended that you take it 2 or 3 times to get an accurate reading. And when you're taking your blood pressure, you really want to use the cuff. You don't really want to be measuring your blood pressure with anything that's using the wrist or the finger, because that's a little bit less accurate. Oops. Let me go back. So I want to talk now about the latest blood pressure guidelines from the American Heart Association. These have changed a little bit in the last few years, so I like to review them. The first level would be normal. Normal blood pressure is considered when the systolic number, that's the top number, and that's when the heart is at work. So that number is higher. So it's ideal is considered less than 120, and then the bottom number is the diastolic number, or when the heart is at rest, and that's less than 80 for normal. And then there's a category called elevated. Elevated is when your systolic number, or that top number, lies between 120 and 129, and that bottom number is less than 80. When you have elevated blood pressure, usually lifestyle modifications can really work to get it back down to that normal level, and we'll talk more about that. The third level is hypertension stage 1, and that's when your systolic number is between 130 and 139, and your diastolic number is between 80 and 89. This again is a good place where lifestyle modifications can make a big impact, but sometimes the doctor would recommend medications depending on your personal history. And then hypertension stage 2, which is when your systolic is 140 or higher and your diastolic is 90 or higher. And that's really much more indicated for medication use. But again, that's a conversation you would need to have with your doctor. So those are the current recommendations for the American Heart Association. And now let's go on and talk a little bit about how high blood pressure can affect your health. Because really a lot of people don't realize the impact that blood pressure can have on your overall health. High blood pressure can damage cells of the arteries linings, and this can lead to less elastic artery walls. And high blood pressure can also really affect the small blood vessels in your body. And this can lead to damage in various areas. So for example, vision loss is due to lack of blood to your retina. And that's again, those small vessels. Heart attack, again, the vessel damage can lead to coronary artery disease, enlarged heart, or heart failure. And kidney disease can be caused by blood damage to those small vessels in your kidneys that make your kidneys less able to filter the liquid and the waste that is in your blood, and it actually can lead to kidney disease or kidney failure. And then stroke, I'm not going to talk much about that because I'm going to leave that to Dr. Rordorf. And that's a little bit to say about that is that the narrowing of your blood vessels can lead to stroke. And then heart failure, over time, high blood pressure can actually strain your heart and cause it to weaken because it's a muscle. So that can lead to heart failure. And then sexual dysfunction is from the lack of blood flow to this area. It can cause decreased effectiveness. So now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Rordorf to talk about stroke.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, everybody. I am going to briefly discuss stroke, and the risk that hypertension, the risk of stroke due to high blood pressure or hypertension. So first of all, what is a stroke? So stroke is divided in two main groups: ischemic stroke and hemorrhagic stroke. Ischemic stroke is caused by a blocked vessel in the brain. The area that is supplied by the blood vessel will die because of lack of blood flow and oxygen delivery, and the scar is what we call the stroke. Hemorrhagic stroke, on the other hand, is caused by leakage of blood outside a vessel, usually caused by a ruptured blood vessel. Next slide, please. So that's exactly what I say. So the stroke occurs now, a clot block the blood supply to the brain. That's for the ischemic stroke. And or when a blood vessel in the brain bursts, and that is the hemorrhage. Depending on which area of the brain is affected, patient might have different symptoms. Patient can die if a stroke is large size or a very sensitive location, or can cause significant disabilities such as paralysis, speech difficulties, and a lot of the survivor will experience emotional problem. Close to 50% of stroke survivors have been reported to develop reactive depression. What is important to know about stroke is that if the deficits are recognized early after their onset, we have treatment that allow us to reverse the deficit or minimize the deficit. So this fast is what we recommend patient to do at home should they or a witness suspect a stroke, what we call the FAST scale. F for face, so if there's a droopiness one side or the other. A for arms, meaning if there is a weakness in one arm or the other. S for speech difficulties, and T for time. So there is only a few hours for us to be able to intervene to try to reduce the deficit. Next slide. And this is what a stroke will look like on the brain. This is an MRI of the brain. Patient is lying down with the feet toward us. So this is the right side, this is the left side, same on the other panel. The gray here is all normal looking brain. The white in this slide here, on this panel here, and black cavities here are normal. And here, this slightly grayer area is that we call a stroke. Next. And the same thing on the CT scan. Again, the patient is lying toward us, right, left, and the gray is normal brain, and the darker areas here is the stroke or the scar in the brain caused by the lack of blood flow. Next. Why we talk and we want to teach the community about stroke is because stroke is the leading cause of serious long-term disability in the US, is the third leading cause of death. And thank you to our effort, prevention, particularly working on the risk factor, which hypertension is one of them, the stroke death has declined significantly in the past, as you can see, and the actual number of stroke has also declined. It continues to decline. Next. So there are a lot of different mechanisms for stroke. So the blood clot, the block of blood vessel can originate from different areas. The heart, aortic, this is the heart, this is the aorta with a plaque. So an aortic plaque can rupture. and a piece of clot can go up. These are the vessels that bring blood to the brain, the carotid, and plaque can build here, a piece of plaque can break up, or vessel can thicken direct into the brain, occlude, and cause lack of blood flow. And hypertension is one of the main risk factors for 3 of these mechanisms: plaque in the aortic arch, plaque development in the carotid arteries, and thickening of blood vessel within the brain. Next. So this slide look at the risk, with what percentage of stroke is due to which risk factor, and you can see the large vessel atherosclerosis, that's meaning plaque buildup in the carotid, and small vessel lacunar stroke, this means thickening of the vessel in the brain. Both of them are mostly due to hypertension, represent a large percentage of stroke that we see. Next. And you can see the risk of each type of stroke: atherosclerotic, lacunar stroke, and most of the unknown stroke. The hypertension tend to be the highest risk factor for all these type of stroke. Next. And these are the relative risk caused by the most common risk factors: hypertension, smoking, diabetes, and hyperlipidemia, physical inactivity, heavy alcohol use. And you can see that among all of these risk factors, hypertension give the highest relative risk. So meaning that if you have 2 patients that have exactly the same profile, one without high blood pressure and one with high blood pressure, the one without high blood pressure will have 3 to 5 times higher risk of stroke than the one without elevated blood pressure. Next. And this is the stroke risk scorecard, and that's I wanted to point out the blood pressure. Jane already discussed that with the new blood pressure limit that have been developed. Again, patient with normal blood pressure, low risk of stroke, high risk of stroke, patient with high blood pressure systolic greater than 140. Next. So the study has shown the higher the blood pressure is, the higher the stroke risk is going to be. So the systolic blood pressure is a more important determinant of the stroke risk, as systolic blood pressure elevation is much more common than higher diastolic, the lower number elevation. And now go back to, sorry, let's come back here, sorry. The risk of stroke seems to increase in a linear fashion. The higher blood pressure is starting at 115, 120. Next. And the other study has shown the risk reduction of stroke given by reduction in blood pressure. So a study demonstrated as only barely a 6 millimeter of mercury decrease in diastolic blood pressure will decrease the incidence of stroke by 40%. Treatment of systolic blood pressure will decrease the risk of stroke by 36% in a different study. And in the elderly, a third study showed that blood pressure reduction and blood pressure control will reduce the risk of stroke close to 50%. Next. So doesn't matter which blood pressure medication do you use, as long as you reduce the blood pressure. The most important thing is there is not a specific effect on reducing the risk of stroke given by a specific class of medication. The reduction in risk is given by the reduction in blood pressure. We know that even small blood pressure reduction can make a big difference. Clearly, the medication needs to be tailored for the individual patient. And there are a lot of ways to use medication. A specific medication doesn't work, we might have to switch it or move to a combination regimen. Next. And now I want to end with a few slides on the hemorrhagic stroke. The hemorrhagic stroke can be caused by either intracerebral hemorrhage or subarachnoid hemorrhage. The intracerebral hemorrhage meaning being the most common one of the hemorrhagic stroke, meaning leakage of blood into the brain. Next. And this is what a hemorrhage looks like. Again, the brain, right, left, and this white area here, that's the hemorrhage or hemorrhagic stroke. Next. And what are the risk of factor for hemorrhagic stroke? Again, we find hypertension being the highest risk factor for whole hemorrhagic stroke. Other one, much less common. Next. I think it's everything for me. Thank you. You're mute, Jen.
Thank you, Dr. Rordorf. That was some great information about stroke and how it's related to hypertension, and otherwise known as high blood pressure. So I'm going to now just carry on and talk more about lifestyle modifications. As we discussed earlier, the lifestyle modification is usually the first treatment for high blood pressure. And this is a list of the modifiable risk factors that affect blood pressure that you have control over. There are also non-modifiable risk factors such as age, family history, and race that you don't have any control over. But I like to focus on the things that you can control. And we're just going to go down the list. The first one you can do is really modify your diet to reduce your sodium intake. Again, trying to be smoke-free. Smoking is the #1 risk factor for cardiovascular disease, as well as being a risk factor for hypertension. And then trying to get regular exercise. The recommendation is 30 minutes a day or 150 minutes a week. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in depth in a few minutes. And then trying to maintain an ideal body weight and trying to reduce your stress on a regular basis, either through mindfulness or through meditation or relaxation techniques. And then avoiding excess alcohol consumption is another one, as well as taking your blood pressure medication as prescribed. I wish I had a pill, unknown caller, that could give you all of these things at once, because if I did, everybody would take it, and that would be great. But it's not that easy. None of these things are easy to achieve, but it's worth it. It's worth the work to get there to reduce your risk, because I have a good friend who always says, if you don't make time to be healthy, you'll have to make time to be sick. So it's good to try to focus on these healthy lifestyle modifications. So now I want to talk a little bit about nourishment or your diet and the risk factors for hypertension. The American Heart Association has some great recommendations. They've actually lowered their recommendations for sodium because sodium is the #1 factor in your diet that leads to hypertension. And they've discovered that sodium is becoming a bigger and bigger problem in our country. So they've lowered the recommendation to 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day is the general recommendation, but they've actually we're trying to move the general public to a lower threshold of 1,500 milligrams a day of sodium for optimal health. And this is actually really hard to achieve because we have a very sodium-laden diet. The average American consumes 3,400 milligrams of sodium a day, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. If you think about a teaspoon, 1 teaspoon of salt contains 2,400 milligrams of sodium. And if you imagine eating that, how salty that, or how salty that would taste and how much salt that would be, that's not even the average American diet. So that's something to think about visually. And you want to cut back by at least 1,000 milligrams a day to significantly improve blood pressure and heart health. So just making that switch of 1,000 milligrams a day, and we're going to look at where we get a lot of sodium in our diet. So maybe you, when I'm talking about this, you can think about your own diet and maybe do some self-reflection and think, where could I maybe make some changes to reduce the sodium? 70% of the sodium in American diets comes from packaged food and prepared foods and restaurant foods, not the salt shaker. So I like to say anything that comes in a box or a bag is probably going to have a lot of sodium in it. And the reason for that is because the food industry is trying to sell more food. Sodium actually plays a couple of different roles. Of course, it enhances flavor, and that's why the food industry loves it. But it also helps to preserve freshness, and it improves actually the texture and appearance of food and gives it a better shelf life. So for a lot of reasons, the food industry has put a lot of it into our food. And salt is really an acquired taste. If you've ever moved to a low sodium diet or for some health reason actually had to, very mindfully reduce the sodium in your diet, or spent a lot of time in another country, you'll understand that salt is really an acquired taste. And if you go to a lower sodium diet and then you go back to trying to eat the salty foods you used to, you're going to really notice it a lot more than you ever did before. So it is one of those things that, yes, maybe at first you'll notice it, but over time you just adapt to that lower sodium level. This is one of the things that I like to point out is if you go to another country and you look for some of the same food products that we sell in this country, they actually have less sodium. The food manufacturers in this company really put in more sodium in the food in our country than they do in any other country. And again, it's not just salt. You can find sodium in MSG, and then sodium bicarbonate, which is just baking soda, and then sodium nitrate, which is also a preservative. So it comes in a couple of different forms. And a good way to look at what's in your food and to try to look out for high sodium foods is to read your food label. Looking at the food label is a great way to start to make some changes in your diet. So the first thing you want to look at is the number of servings per container and the serving size. So if this is something, let's say like a bag of chips, this is not a bag of chips, but if it were, you definitely want to think to yourself, am I going to eat the whole thing? And if you are going to eat the whole thing, it's important to do the math. So here we have 1 serving, but it says 1 serving is 2/3 of a cup, and there are 8 servings in the container and 230 calories. So if you were going to eat the whole thing, you would have to do the math. But since we're talking about sodium, let's go down to number 3 and look at this product has 160 milligrams of sodium per serving. So if you eat the entire package of this, you're going to be consuming 1,280 milligrams of sodium. And that's like close to the optimal recommendation for the entire day. So you can see why Americans' diets are really higher in sodium, because a lot of our food products, once you start looking at these labels, you're going to notice are very laden with sodium. So I want to make you aware of the Salty 6. This is straight from the American Heart Association. And it's really we're trying to raise awareness about the amount of sodium in bread, rolls, pizzas, sandwich with cold cuts, soups, burritos, and tacos that we eat every day. If you think about having a sandwich, a piece of bread generally has about 110 milligrams of sodium. So if you have 2 pieces of bread, that's 220. And then you have even just 1 cup of soup, a canned soup, that's around 480. And that's even before, so before you even put cold cuts on there or cheese, which are both very heavy in sodium, you're almost at you're at like 700-800 milligrams of sodium. So it's really easy to get to that recommended daily amount, unless you're really trying to choose foods that are lower in sodium. And what are the foods that are the lowest in sodium? This is what everybody should be eating, of course, is fruits and vegetables. As a dietitian, they are my favorite. Trying to eat any food closest to its whole form is going to be the better bet. It's going to be less sodium, less fat, less additives. So trying to eat foods in that whole form is really going to help you reduce the sodium overall in your diet. And then here's some basic guidelines to look for, though, because everybody does grab a snack. You want to look at your label, and a low sodium snack would be something that has 140 milligrams or less per serving. And then if you're eating out and you have a menu that has nutritional information on it, you want to choose a food or an entree that has less than 400 milligrams of sodium in it. And a lot of restaurants will have their nutritional information available for you. If not, it's available online. But a good guideline to follow is to try to limit how much you eat out, because when you eat out, you don't know about the marinades and the sauces and the cooking methods. And again, restaurants are trying to make their food taste really good, so we come back and we eat it again and again. And so they do add a good amount of salt to enhance that flavor and the texture, as well as other things that might not lead to a heart-healthy diet. And then alcohol. The recommendation for alcohol is 1 drink for women and 2 drinks for men per day. And really, once you get above that number, your blood pressure will go up. So alcohol is one of those things that we know raises blood pressure. And we know that repeated binge drinking, which is, I think, 4 drinks or more a day, can lead to long-term increases in blood pressure. So you really want to think about making sure you're limiting that alcohol. And then the healthy lifestyle modification exercise is a great way to control blood pressure. If you're, again, in one of those borderline areas or that elevated area, it's really also very helpful in trying to lose weight or maintain weight. The recommendations for adults is 150 minutes of moderate exercise a day or 75 minutes of vigorous aerobic activity. And I like to tell people, if you're not somebody who's exercised before, please don't go out and start doing 150 minutes a week. You want to start small. If you set goals for yourself, set small goals, 5 minutes, increasing 5 minutes, or if you're someone who walks around a block, maybe go one more driveway or to one more telephone pole. Start slow and make small goals to be successful. And moderate activities are great to exercise. Brisk walking, at this time of year, as it gets a little cooler out, that brisk walk is a little easier to do because you want to walk briskly to stay warm. And if you're someone who likes the pool, there's a lot of great places to swim inside this time of year. You can do water aerobics, or gardening is. We're kind of getting out of gardening season here in the Northeast, but we are doing a lot of leaf raking, and that's great exercise. So that definitely counts. Or if you're someone who enjoys dancing on the weekend, that's another great way to get some exercise. But again, find something you like. Trying to do it every day and make it a habit is really the best thing for this modifiable risk factor so that you get it in every day. And then another modifiable risk factor is stress. Trying to reduce stress every day is really important. Our world is a little bit more intense than it used to be. There's a lot of negativity out there. So it's really important to find a way to engage in relaxation every day. And if you're exercising and that helps to reduce your stress, that's perfect. Another thing you could try is meditation. If you're new to meditation, there's a lot of really good apps out there. There's Headspace. If you have a Fitbit, your Fitbit has meditations on it, MyFitnessPal, or if you just Google it, there's a lot of great different techniques to try. And I definitely would encourage you to try one every day. Also, trying to find a hobby you enjoy is a great idea. And then if you need to, also seek support. You can seek support from your family and friends, or if you are feeling that, maybe you need a little more help, a professional. So, but trying to find ways to deal with that stress is really important. And then I like to talk about sleep. Sleep is one of those things that helps our body restore itself. We don't give sleep enough credit. Sleep is so important to our overall health. And the more we study sleep, the more we realize this. So getting a good night's sleep can help your body restore itself and really set yourself up to be more relaxed in the next day, because I don't know about you, but if I don't get enough sleep, I tend to feel like my stress level raises a little bit quicker. So setting yourself up for good sleep, don't take a nap after 3 p.m. Try to avoid exercise close to bedtime. Always avoid caffeine and nicotine close to bed, and avoid alcohol before bed. I like to hit on this one because, I grew up with parents who always had a nightcap, but that nightcap is going to help you fall asleep. But what alcohol does is it gives us junk sleep. It actually doesn't allow our bodies to fall into a deep sleep, and we end up waking up. So it's really not a great way to help with sleep. But what is a good way is to create a good sleep environment. Turn off and make sure you eliminate any bright lights or blue lights. And you really want to turn off that phone or that computer at least 1 hour before bed, because that has light that stimulates your brain to wake up. And if you're stimulating your brain to wake up, you're going to just make it really difficult for you to go to sleep. So make sure you have a nice cool room and you stick to a schedule. Those are probably the best things that you can do for sleep. And I wanted to just mention this. I was going to lead this, but I think we're getting close on time. So a good stress reduction technique to try, really easy, is box breathing. It's just 4 steps. You inhale slowly through your nose and mouth, count to 4. Well, then you hold your breath for 4, and then you exhale slowly for 4. And this is a fantastic technique to try. They actually teach this technique to Navy SEALs to do this before they go into a mission, to kind of calm down and to sort of center themselves. So this is one that we'll share with you that you can try. And I want to thank you for joining us, and I'm going to open it up to the panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Rohrdoff and Jane. That was amazing information. I know that I always learn a ton during these webinars, and I hope our audience has as well. But there are some questions. So at this point, we do like to spend some time really answering the questions that are top of mind for all of you. So we will try to get through as many as we can. I do want to mention, because someone did ask, in the Q&A if we were going to share the slides. So I do want to mention that as a registered person for this webinar and an attendee, you will be receiving resources tomorrow in terms of some information that both Jane and Dr. Rohrdoff have suggested. And we will also share the slides, so you will get that in your email. So I know it's so much content and really good practical information that we all can practice. So we will make sure to get that out to you. So at this point, we're going to bring everyone to our panel, which is Jane, Noki, and Dr. Rohrdorf. And I'm just going to field some questions that are in the Q&A, and then we can kind of see who would be best to answer those. So Jane, if you can stop sharing your screen so then we can get everyone's kind of bigger faces on the screen. Perfect. That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so the first question, are blood pressure guidelines the same for someone who's the age 75 years old? So does age factor into this in terms of blood pressure guidelines? Don't know who would like to answer that.
I can take.
I'm not.
Sorry, go ahead, Anne.
No, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sure. So, I mean, yes, the indication, the guideline for blood pressure do not change with age, are the same regardless of someone's age.
Okay, great. And then does it matter which arm you use when you're taking your blood pressure? And then the second part of that person's question was, what does it mean if the diastolic pressure is normal and the systolic is higher than normal? Example 140/75.
Well, usually should not matter what arm you use. The blood pressure should be the same in both arms, unless there is a problem with blood supplies to one arm. So you might want to check both arms the first time, and once you make sure that they're more or less the same, then it doesn't matter really which arm do you use. With regard to the second question, that's hypertension. The great majority of time, hypertension present with only elevated systolic blood pressure and normal diastolic blood pressure.
Okay, great. And then how common is atrial fibrillation and how does it increase stroke risk?
Atrial fibrillation is very common. When I showed my slide, I was pointing out the most common, probably I should have said, the most common modifiable risk factor for stroke is hypertension. Atrial fibrillation is a very high risk factor for stroke, but it's not modifiable. So if someone has, we cannot prevent atrial fibrillation.
Okay. And Jane or Ann, this might be good for you. And I apologize. Some of these might have been, answered within your slides, but I think we just want to ensure that we answer everyone's questions. So does sugar consumption add to high blood pressure?
My understanding is that it will, in a lot of added sugar, could add to blood pressure, but not in whole foods. Jane might have more to say on that too.
No, that's my understanding as well. Added sugar, we know adds, if you have a diet that's high in added sugar, it can lead to inflammation, which then can lead to high blood pressure. So that's why you'll now see that sugar has been added to the food label in total sugars and added sugars. And it is really important to try to choose foods that are low in added sugars. The total sugars, some foods are naturally have sugars in them, obviously fruits and vegetables, and dairy products will have natural sugars in them, but trying to limit that added sugar to eliminate that inflammation. So that is really what you want to do.
Okay, great. And so this is kind of a unique question, but I don't know, and I'm not sure if anyone on the panel will be able to answer this, but I'm going to put it out there anyways. So someone had asked about, they understand the connection between diet and risk of stroke, and for that reason, seeking the counsel or having an appointment with a nutritionist obviously is a helpful step towards that. Do you all know, is that something kind of routinely covered by insurance? Does it, how would someone go about accessing a nutritionist? And is it typically covered within someone's insurance? And I know that that's hard to answer in the sense of we have a zillion thousand insurance forms. But I guess if you could just speak to that broadly, if anyone has that information.
So I had actually reached out to another dietitian in the hospital who liaises with the outpatient department. Medicare only covers dietitian consultations if you have diabetes or kidney disease. It is not currently an offering for someone who's concerned or at risk. It's only if you have those disease processes that it would be reimbursed for Medicare. Private insurances often follow Medicare's guidelines. So you can see a nutritionist at the hospital through the outpatient department. They do have a bit of a wait time at Newton-Wellesley at this time. And the thought would be, I know in the question it was considered to be quite expensive. It would be not an inexpensive visit, but perhaps about $400, I think. Okay. There are private dietitians, and Jane could probably speak to that, that are, if you didn't want to come through the hospital system, because it is tricky with insurance.
There are private dietitians out there. I just make sure you're working with a licensed dietitian or a registered dietitian to make sure they actually have the background in dietetics that you're looking for. You can go, the American Dietetic Association, the ADA, is a website. They actually have a dietitian finder on that website. And a lot of local areas have dietitians in private practice. So if you Google dietitians near me, I think you would find private practices. Again, I would just caution that you make sure that you're working with someone who's licensed and registered.
Great, that's very helpful, actually. Thank you so much. And obviously this was kind of touched on around, diet and exercise and all, but so this is more broad, but how does weight loss affect blood pressure?
Do you want that one, Jane?
Yeah, there's a direct correlation between weight loss and blood pressure. I mean, it does depend, and Dr. Rohrer could talk to this better, but it does depend on the underlying cause of blood pressure. But if you're in that elevated category and you lose weight, pretty much your blood pressure is going to come down. So will your cholesterol, all of your numbers will probably come down with weight loss. And a weight loss, like I mentioned, it's hard to do. But if you try to modify your food intake with exercise, that's the best way to try to achieve weight loss.
I also think that sometimes the behaviors that lead to weight loss, which is often improving what you're eating and increasing your exercise, all tie together, so that it's the combination of all the better habits that result in weight loss that help affect the blood pressure. Also, I'll definitely make a plug for the exercise that's often associated with burning more calories as its own intervention on your blood pressure as well.
Great.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that, when you exercise and you build muscles, so like if you're someone who's always been a walker and you're trying to lose weight, maybe try to add some strength training, because when you build muscle, your body becomes more metabolically active at rest, which is really important, because that means you're burning more calories even when you're sitting, when you're sleeping. And that's really the key to actually not just losing weight, but also maintaining weight.
Great, thank you. And this is a kind of straightforward question. Are crackers high in salt? And I'm assuming it might depend on which cracker. So I don't know if you can answer that just with that generic question.
Yeah, you have to look at the food label. So hopefully when you get this information, if you look at the label that I provided you, and you use that guideline of 140 milligrams of sodium or less for a snack, you can choose a cracker that would meet those guidelines, and that would give you a good. My other plug would be try to get a whole wheat cracker. 100% whole wheat should be the first ingredient on a healthy cracker, because then you're gonna get not only lower sodium, but you'll get higher fiber, which will help your digestion, help you stay full longer. I could go down a whole road on that.
That will be our next one.
Right.
On crackers. Okay, so I'm thinking this might be good for Dr. Rordorf. Why has the stroke rate declined over the past few years? So I guess if you could maybe just speak to kind of what you've seen in the trajectory of stroke management.
Sure. I mean, it's very simple. One is because we've become much better in advising patients to control the risk factors, specifically losing weight, exercise, eating healthy, particularly blood pressure management has made the most impact in decreasing the risk of stroke, decreasing the cholesterol, cessation. So all things that we can, attacking, if you allow me the word, all the modifiable risk factors. And in addition to that, we are using medication that tend to be much more effective in preventing plaque buildup, particularly the medication under the name of class statin, like Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor. Those medications not only lower the cholesterol, but also have an independent property in stabilizing atherosclerotic plaque and making the plaque less prone to grow and rupture. So all these together has combined to decrease significantly the risk of stroke.
Great, thank you, thank you. And this question came in, is that if someone improves their diet, increases their exercise, so doing all the right things, obviously, how would they know if medication was no longer needed? So I guess as you're kind of making all these changes and improving your lifestyle, what does that indicate in terms of the medication that you have been on or are on?
Well, you need to measure your blood pressure regularly. As James said, probably a different time of the day because blood pressure can vary. The blood pressure really varies throughout the day. And keep a diary and bring the diary to the primary care physician so he or she can decide if medication is still indicated.
Okay, great. And then is reading sodium content, so this person has been reading them, which is great. Is it better to read the mg or the percent of salt when looking at sodium?
So the percent is really the percent of daily, oh, am I muted?
No,
you're
you're good.
Okay.
You're on.
The percent is the percent of daily value, and that's based on a 2,000 calorie diet, which is not great for everybody. That's not what everybody consumes. So I would definitely look at the milligrams and try to use the guidelines that I laid out for a snack of 140 milligrams or an entree less than 400. I know that, you definitely have to do some math. So adding the milligrams up in your bread and in, your cold cuts or your cheese, it is some work, and also making sure you're looking at the sodium and things that you probably don't think there's sodium in, even your yogurts and things like that, like where you wouldn't normally look. So just looking at all those milligrams together and trying to find, when you're buying products, really compare products and trying to choose the better of the products. I do a great food demo with potato chips. Even though I'm a dietitian, I still love potato chips, but I say, they're not all potato chips are created equally. There are some that have a lot more sodium in them than others. So if you're gonna have your favorite snack, but try to choose a better one.
And Jane, you also usually tell people to look at the serving size. So some chip bags, you get like 3 chips, and some you get 15 for the same serving. So you have to do a little more math as well, depending on how much of the bag you're going to eat.
I know they always get you that way with the servings and the size of the bags and everything.
Yeah.
I know that we're coming up on time, and Dr. Rordorf does have to hop off at 11. So I thought I'd throw one more question in for him. Is small vessel disease on a brain MRI concerning in an asymptomatic person? I know that's somewhat specific, but I don't know if you could respond to that.
Sure. I mean, most of the time is a asymptomatic incidental finding, but it might represent, I mean, two things. One is that patient has cardiovascular risk factors that are not being well controlled, particularly hypertension. Also increase the risk of a eventually occurring symptomatic small vessel stroke, and increase the risk of cognitive decline later in life if these the risk factors are not brought under control and the white matter disease progresses.
Okay, great, thank you. And last question, is intermittent fasting effective for weight management? What would you comment on that?
Oh, that's I passed that. I passed the
Okay.
Intermittent fasting has become very popular. Excuse me. And there's a number of different intermittent fasts that are out there right now. And I would say, if it's working for you to do the intermittent fasting, just if you have diabetes or you have any other underlying risk factor, you really need to pay attention to that. Because if you have diabetes, intermittent fasting is not recommended. It can result in very low blood sugar. But if you're someone who's choosing to fast for 12 hours and eat for 8 hours, or there's a lot of different versions of it. Most people will find that it works for a little while and it's hard to sustain. So my recommendation is, if it's working for you, that's great. You can do it as long as you don't have any health risks. But honestly, trying to eat a healthy diet that's well balanced and really centers on whole foods, avoiding processed foods, trying to limit eating out, limit alcohol consumption, that's really going to probably be, a more sustainable diet. But trying to use the intermittent fasting to lose weight initially is a fine way to start. It's, it is something that a lot of people are finding success with. I get cautious because it's a little bit of a fad right now. And really, if you can start with that and really move to just maintaining a healthy diet, I think you'll be better off.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we are at time, which has been great. So I want to thank Dr. Wardorf, who just hopped off, Jane and Ann, and really thank you for everyone for those great questions. It always helps keep the program going, and they're so relevant and helpful to everyone who's listening to the answers. And as a follow-up, as I mentioned previously, we will be sending out an email with the slide deck here. The link will be posted on our website, as well as we will share other resources that will really give you practical and worthwhile tips for you to kind of monitor blood pressure and hypertension. And just as a reminder, Newton-Wellesley's Community Collaborative has a continuous menu of programs on a variety of different topics. And these are all listed on our website, which is www.nwh.org. And it is updated frequently. So please kind of continuously look at that menu so that you can stay in tune with what we have offered. And then on behalf of Newton-Wellesley, thank you all for joining this morning, and I hope you have a wonderful day.